Now starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, greetings from New York. This is Jody Ordioni, founder of Achieve Engagement, a community committed to driving innovation and success through employee engagement. And today I'm here with Jason Lauritsen, Chief Content Officer of Achieve, and the person behind our fantastic What's Next series. He's joined by Rebecca Ryan, and thanks to all of you here with us today, we have set another Achieve Engagement registration history mark. For today's webcast, What's Next? Normal is Gone, and How to Plan for a Disruptive Future at Work. Before I turn it over to Jason and Rebecca, please let's warmly thank our sponsor, Ultimate Software, for putting on this fantastic content today. Ultimate Software is a leading cloud provider of human capital management solutions. Built with a focus on people, Ultimate's award-winning UltiPro delivers solutions for HR, payroll, talent, and time, as well as employee surveys and sentiment analysis, all designed to improve employee experiences throughout the organization. And a couple of housekeeping tips. Today's webcast will end in an hour, and we'll save 10 minutes at the end for questions. If you do have a question, use the question box on your screen, and they will get to it in the order it was received. Also, remember to look out for an all-important email tomorrow. It will contain a direct link to today's on-demand webcast viewing. We'll also have the continuing education credit information for SHRM and HRCI, and we also have some real goodies in those links within the email as well. So be sure to keep a lookout for it, and if you don't get it, let me know. As always, I want to thank everybody for being part of Achieve Engagement's community, and let me know how I can continue to be a resource to you. And now, without further ado, Jason, it's all yours.
Thanks, Jody. And hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. I hope that amidst all of this craziness that you are well and safe and hopefully finding a way to survive and thrive through all of this craziness and nonsense. Today, I think we will hopefully, if nothing else, hopefully equip you with some tools to help you start making maybe some degree of sense about how to move forward through all of this. So thank you for being here. I come to you from my usual location, the place I am seemingly all the time. It's Groundhog Day now in the office here in beautiful Nebraska today. We've got a beautiful day ahead of us, 70-degree and sunshine, so I'm in a particularly good mood. The weather has a disproportionate impact on the way I show up every day now, so I'm doubly excited for today. Now, for those of you that are new to this, to the webcast, if you've never joined a What's Next webcast in the past, then let me offer up that today is not going to be the usual What's Next. Normally, every month I invite a guest on, someone who has deep expertise on a particular topic, and we just have a conversation for about 40 minutes or so, back and forth, kind of unpacking it together and talking about it. But this month, we're actually inviting back a past guest and a longtime friend and mentor and teacher of mine, Rebecca Ryan. And we've invited Rebecca back because it felt like we needed her voice, we needed her leadership and her guidance. And so what we're going to do today is a little bit different than what we generally do. The way it's going to work is Rebecca and I are going to talk a little bit in a minute to acquaint you with her, for those that aren't familiar with her. And then I'm going to set a little bit of backdrop as to how we got here and why we thought that this would be really helpful. And then Rebecca's going to do some teaching, because I know for me, some of the tools that I have relied on and have been really most helpful to me in thinking about how do we get through this, what does it mean for my family, for my business, for my community, are a result of what Rebecca has taught me. And so I wanted to invite her here to share some of that with you. Then we're going to take your questions and let her unpack it. And then we're going to, at the very end of the session today, she and I have been working together on kind of a forecast of what we think is going to happen in the next 18 months or so in the workforce, and things that you should probably be thinking about and paying attention to. So that's how this is going to work. Rebecca, welcome. Hello. Glad you're here.
Wonderful to be here. It's so hard to mute me in real life. It's so easy to mute me via technology. It's one of the blessings of this technology.
So
Jason,
so
I
weird.
can't wait to hear what you have to say. I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to mute myself so that they can
Before
hear from my smarter, better look at. Wait, you want me to
before
stay
you do
with
that,
you?
before you do that,
Yes.
for those that
What?
don't know, so Rebecca is a futurist. She's a trained economist. She has a consulting organization that works with all sorts of entities, largely though cities and regions and areas on thinking about and planning for long range futures. And the way Rebecca and I met goes back a long time. Actually, I knew you before you knew me, but I saw you do one of the most remarkable, speaking of technology, one of the most remarkable keynotes I've ever seen. You couldn't make it there in person, got snowed in, did it over technology like this before technology like this was a thing, and it was genius. And ever since then, I've been a fanboy of Rebecca Ryan. And so, and then I attended your futurist camp here 2 years ago, and that's really where I learned these tools. And we'll talk a little bit more about futurist camp in a minute. But before I let you go back off and I talk for a sec, tell us three things. This is a tradition of this webcast. Tell us
Oh,
three things
God,
about
you
you
warned me about
that are
this.
interesting, that are not work related. So help us get to know you a little bit.
I played professional basketball in Europe. Uh, I'm gonna kind of pivot off that one. It was an accident. I did not go to Europe to play professional basketball, but I did. So that's interesting. That should count for one. Number two, I was an accidental professional basketball player. So I realize I'm kind of cutting the cat here. And number three, the thing that I am the most proud of in my whole life, now I don't have kids of my own. The thing I'm the most proud of in my whole life is that my dogs do what I ask them to do.
That you're
So
winning because my dog does not. So you're winning. So
right? Every dog owner knows that. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
that's an achievement. All right, so I'm going to give me a couple minutes. I'm going to set the stage and then I'll turn it over to you to teach us some things. So for everybody out there, here's how we got to this. I know that over the last 2 months, right, as the world got flipped upside down and everything went crazy, and things started to shift under our, the ground beneath our feet started to shift. I had to first kind of find my own footing and get a sense for where I was and what was going on, and kind of find a way, much like you did probably with your family, and what the situation was, try to find my balance. Once I did that, I started having conversations with a lot of you about what was going on. And as I was having conversations with those who were in the workforce or those that were running a business or whatever, what I kept running into is I kept hearing a lot of things. A lot of people were kind of, I think we were triaging, right, just to survive for a little bit. And then I started to hear things about like, well, when things get back to normal, or there was a lot of like, there was a lot of desire or thought that like, oh, this is all gonna return to normal at some point. This is temporary. It's not going to last that long. And then as things started to prolong, right, as we realized this was going to take a while, we started to, I think, get a little uncomfortable with, oh my, like normal, like this might be going to take longer than we thought, and there's a new normal kind of emerging, and there's things, and we weren't sure how to make sense of it. And so we started to kind of, I think, mourn some of the things that we were losing, and that we get wrapped up in grief and denial and a lot of things. And I think we're at this point where we wanted to add to do this webinar today because there's kind of this reality we need to wrap our arms around, and that is that normal is gone. There is there is no more normal, right? The January 2020 normal, where we kind of longingly look back and think, boy, if we could only return back to normal. That normal is gone. We know that's gone. When you look around, you see that it's gone, and I think that is just setting in for us. And our opportunity today is I think to start from a position of embracing that it's gone and finding a way to let go, to say goodbye. And honestly, what I would say is I'm increasingly of the mindset that, at least from a workplace perspective, good riddance. Good riddance, because I know right now it feels like January 2020 was a delightful, wonderful place to be. Certainly, people weren't dying of this terrible virus, and I understand that. But if we think about workplace and where we're going and what that will look like, if we do a reality check on January 2020, it wasn't all that great. I mean, we know that the engagement stats, you've heard this over and over again, that 2/3 of employees are disengaged according to Gallup, and that's not getting a lot better, and we've known that. But also, one of my favorite sources of reality check is the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's an annual study report done on global levels of trust. And here's a few nuggets, a few reality checks about where we were. The most recent report came out in January 2020. And by the way, if you're listening in, I'm going to reference some data here. We're going to send you the links on where to get these data after the webinar. When you get your email, the links will be in there, so don't worry. But get a load of this, read this. A majority of respondents in this survey, to their survey they do, in every developed market do not believe that they will be better off in 5 years' time. That's pretty depressing. And more than half of respondents globally believe that capitalism in its current form is now doing more harm than good in the world. That was where our mindset was in January 2020. On top of that, in this survey, you can get a load of this one, where employees, an overwhelming number of employees, expect businesses to pay decent wages and to retrain us when our jobs get replaced or displaced. Although only 1/3 of those people actually trusted business to do it. So there was a real trust issue. And I think this is one of our biggest issues. I actually wrote a blog post that just published yesterday about this, that I think our biggest issue in all of this from the workplace is trust, and realizing that we don't have a lot of it, and that's what we should be working on. That's why remote work has been so hard. But I also want to give you kind of a reality check on what's changed, right? If we say goodbye to the normal and we kiss that, like wave goodbye January 2020, we're never coming back, at least from a work perspective, we're never going back to that spot. What's coming? What's next? What's in front of us? Well, here's some things that have changed in the last 2 months that we need to wrap our brains around. This comes from a Robert Half study that they just published the end of April, so it's pretty fresh. They surveyed, I think, 1,000, it was a random sample, 1,000 employees. What they found, 77% of them were working remotely. Of those, 63% of the people that they surveyed said one of the things that's happened is they now realize that they can do their job remotely, right? They can do their job outside the office. So they now know it's possible to work remotely. And they found that their work life, 60% say their work life has improved because they don't have a commute. And so they're like, hey, this isn't bad, right? This is working for me. There's actually some benefits. And another survey that just published, IBM Institute of Business Value, I think is what their institute is called, and I'll send you this link too. They just did a survey. This was 25,000 people in the US. And what they found, 75% of the people they surveyed indicate now that they would like remote working to at least be part of the mix for them. They at least want to continue to do this on some level. 54% of the people, of 25,000, 54% said that they would like their primary way of working to be remote. Like, that is a massive shift, right? Things have moved. And so normal's gone. Things are changing. There's some new realities. What do we do? What does this mean? That is the question that we're here to help with today. How do we think about this? Because I know that we might be starting to wrap our brain around this reality, but that doesn't help us necessarily think about and make decisions about what comes next, or helping our organization think about what comes next. And so this is why my friend Rebecca is here to help, because this is what she does in her business, and this is how she helps leaders and people of all sorts of disciplines figure it out. So with that, I know the futurist camp skills I learned were super helpful. So Rebecca, I'm going to transition this to you now to help us sort of figure out what to do with this, and maybe help us understand how we go forward. And then once you are through that, we'll come back together and take some questions.
That sounds really good. Man, you guys are so lucky to have a person like Jason who is trying to think around the corner on your team, on the Achieve Global team, on your team today. I know, man, 20 years ago, I wish we had somebody like Jason thinking about the future of work. I think it would have been more dynamic, more interesting. I may have stuck around a little bit longer at any of my 5 employers if we had somebody like Jason, on the job. So I want to start by, there are going to be just a couple of beats that we're going to hit today. So the first beat is that I want to talk to you about how you think about the future. So the idea that, and maybe Jason, can you take it all the way up to the very top the top slide. Thank you. He's being like my guy behind the screen, so he's going to take it up to the top. So the first thing I want to do is talk with you about how you think about the future, right? And then I want to talk with you about how to think like a futurist about the future happening at your workplace. We're going to take some discussion, and then Jason and I have spent a couple hours together thinking about what the future of work could be. And I share that with you only because this was just 2 hours among a couple of bozos thinking together using the very tools that you're going to learn in the next few minutes. So thinking strategically like a futurist would about plausible futures, it is not difficult, but it is difficult because of how we think. So let's go to the next slide. Again, these are kind of the 3 big beats. How you think, 3 scenarios, we're going to have a discussion, and then Jason and I are going to share with you what we came up with. So on the next slide, you know, why do we want to think about how we think? This is very meta. It's like the blue pill in the Matrix, right? The idea is that over time, as we are shaped by experience, our brains literally develop ruts, mental shortcuts, right? So in the same way, if you had just laid down new sod and you insisted on driving your car over it again and again and again, some grass would deaden, some ruts would get built in. That same thing happens with your mind. So when I train futurists at camp or elsewhere, we start first and we keep up a cadence of always thinking about how we think. So I'm going to give you a few examples of this, all right? The first one, and Jason, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute just for a second, because I want you to play 2 roles. I want you to respond to this question first as a person on the street will respond to it. And then I'm going to test you on how well you did in futurist camp. I'm going to ask you how a futurist would think about it. So here's the first question. Now it's a word problem. I'll repeat it twice. A 4-year-old girl is reading fluently. Now a college sophomore, what's her grade point average? Question again. A 4-year-old girl is reading fluently. Now a college sophomore, what is her grade point average? And by the way, college sophomores tend to be 19 or 20 years old, so we've got between 15 and 16 years. If we asked a person on the street, what do you think her GPA is? What do you think they'd say, Jason?
Probably a 4.0.
Yeah, I mean, reading fluently at 4, jeepers, in how many languages, right? But knowing what you know, because you've been trained as a futurist, what is probably a more probable answer?
And by the way, I was not warned about this, so off top of my head. So what I would do is I'd go look for trends. I'd go look to see what reading fluency at an early age suggests about future school performance, and I try to figure out what would help me maybe predict that or help me narrow in what the probability of grade point average would be. But I don't have any idea of knowing for sure, but I could maybe give you a prediction.
Yes, you pass. Jason wants to first start with trends. Okay, is this predictive of something else? But what he would find in the literature very quickly is it's not predictive. And in fact, if you try to say, oh, she'll have a 4.0 or she'll be on the dean's list, you're using a technique that we all use called anchoring bias. So for those of you who are real rebels in HR land, you see this happen all the time. You come in with like a new idea. You're like, hey, I've got a new idea. And somebody craps all over it and says, we tried that once, right? As if trying it once in a different time and in a different era means it's never, ever going to work again. That's anchoring bias. When you ascribe old data onto new points in time, right? Anchoring. It's like you're anchoring a judgment based on something that long ago and far away happened. Let me give you another example, right? Because we need to start to see how we ourselves do this. Here's another example. The establishment of a large Midwestern city was adamant that they would not put money into public transportation because they said no one will use it. No one will use it. The establishment of a large Midwestern company refused to put any money into public transit because they said nobody's going to use this. What they were showing is another cognitive bias, and I think it's confirmation bias. And here's where it comes down to. These established, well-to-do leaders don't themselves use public transit, and therefore they project their experience onto others, right? It's like, this is true to me, so it must be true to others, right? Other examples of confirmation bias that we use in our daily life, as we're seeing this especially now, right, in this kind of COVID environment, is if you usually get your news from Rachel, and you know who I'm talking about, you probably get most of your news from news outlets that are more progressive and liberal. If you usually listen to Fox or have Fox on in the background, we also know that you probably listen to those folks. So what we tend to do, and note this for yourself, you tend to believe, you tend to pull in additional data to confirm your own beliefs. This is dangerous. It's really dangerous because the world doesn't always agree with what you believe, right? So we've got to be able to listen to people who have different points of view. We've got to be able to overcome our own confirmation bias. Here's one for you. If anyone in this audience is always late, joke is the meeting won't really start until 5 after because people are waiting for you, right? This doesn't mean you're a bad person. In fact, research shows that if you're always late, you're probably more optimistic than the average person, which is a wonderful, optimism can be a wonderful quality to have. And the way it gets applied is you think, oh, I'll get there in time. I have in a working at home environment, I've got time to go to the bathroom, get a cup of coffee, do all these things before the meeting starts. You're overly optimistic, right? But what this is, it's also a heuristic, it's a cognitive bias. It's called the planning fallacy. The planning fallacy is that you underestimate the time required regardless of all contrary evidence. So back in the days when you used to drive to work, if you were always late for work, you would think, well, maybe today I'm gonna hit every light green, right? Or maybe today things will go my way. That's the planning fallacy. So I bring this up, these are just 3 of dozens of cognitive biases that can really get in our way as we try to think what might be. What might be. And by the way, these biases are often useful. They're often useful. Like if your kid today asks you for 20 bucks, you probably automatically say no, right? Because you don't have to think through it and have a discussion every time. You know, you don't like being an ATM, so you say no. So there's an example where really fast thinking, a response might be useful, right? If you dart to miss oncoming traffic, or if you automatically know the fastest way to get from point A to point B, those are ruts in your mind that get created, or reactions that get created, that are very useful to you. The problem is that right now, we are trying to reimagine something pretty powerful. And this kind of fast thinking, these cognitive biases, hurt us because they narrow our field to what we know. They narrow our field to what we believe, whether that's right or wrong. They narrow our field to think, oh, we can get this done real quickly, when in fact, this might be a multi-layered issue. Jason pointed a moment ago to the data that shows that trust is just critical in this whole matrix moving forward. Trust takes a long time, right? It takes a long time to develop and to establish, and it doesn't take very long to break. So as we are thinking about this new future of work, first things first, Grasshopper, pay attention to your own mind. Pay attention to your own mind. And a little hack on this is this. If somebody brings an idea that you notice yourself having a physical reaction to, the hair goes up on the back of your neck, your stomach tightens, you might feel your jaw clench, or maybe you're sort of sitting back or your eyes narrow, right? Your physical body will tell you where your biases are. So pay attention. This is job number 1 for everyone who wants to think like a futurist, is to understand how your mind works. All right, now, let me share this 3 scenario process with you. So on the next slide, you're gonna see a blog that I wrote about this very thing. So it's a 6-step process. We're not gonna do all 6 steps. We're gonna cut right to the heart of the matter, but you'll get sent this link to this post. It's been extremely helpful for hundreds of organizations. This is my most read blog post ever. And I started doing this stuff after COVID happened. Like, how can we start thinking like futurists? So let's go to the next slide. And here's what we're thinking about here, right? 3 future zones. This is step 4 of my 6-step process. You have to think in terms of 3 future zones, and here they are, right? Zone 1, next slide. Zone 1 is this blue zone. It is a challenging future, right? Zone 2, the green zone, is an expectable future. And then zone 3 is this kind of visionary zone. We call it surprisingly successful, right? So there is not a single future. There are multiple plausible futures. And if you think about that dot right in the center of the screen as today, May 14th, as of the day we're taping this, but whatever day is as you're watching it, that's just today. And how do we think forward in these 3 zones? And for the purpose of today, we're going to think in terms of 18 months, right? Let's think in terms of an 18-month future. Some of you might say, dude, I need through the end of the year. Choose your own length of your domain, but for the purposes of Jason's and my pontificating about what we think the future will be and so forth, we chose an 18-month domain, the future of the workplace in the next 18 months. And then I want to walk you through how to think about a challenging zone. In fact, you may want to right now draw the cone on your sheet of paper. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions in each of these 3 zones, starting with the challenging zone. And I want you to jot down your thoughts on what this plausible scenario could be. Okay, so in the challenging zone, here's the first question for the challenging zone. What things could happen to your organization that would make the next 18 months extremely difficult? Okay. The question again, what things could happen to your organization that would make the next 18 months very difficult? Start jotting those ideas down. Next question. What are some things that we as an organization could do that would make our future extremely difficult? Are there some potholes that you are worried that your organization is going to fall into? Do you have some sort of a loose cannon inside your organization who you're worried is going to like shoot their mouth off at the wrong time and just, destroy trust or, inadvertently cause psychological or other injury to people, right? So the second question under the challenging zone is, what are some things that your own organization might do to itself to make the next 18 months more challenging? So think through these things. We could spend a lot more time on this zone, but we're going to move up to the expectable zone now. All right, so in the zone of conventional expectations, we often call this kind of the business as usual, right? Even though we know everything is unusual. One of the first things to think about is, how did your organization recover from the Great Recession? What happened in 2009, 2010, right? Did you come out of it pretty quickly within 18 months? Did you come out of it within 24 months? Did you just get back to parity in terms of headcount or whatnot? So what happened the last time we had a massive economic impact, right? What do you expect in that future? And now ask yourself, right, what can we learn from that? What are some things we learned from going through that period of time previously? And I recognize that some of you may have changed jobs since then and so forth, but get yourself in the mindset that there is a way that organizations respond when the crap hits the fan, right? And there's some expectation around how that's going to play out. So that's in your zone of expectable future. Now let's go into zone 3, the visionary zone. In this zone of high aspiration, I'm going to ask 2 questions. Question 1, what are some things that could happen to your organization that would make the future workplace really amazing over the next 18 months? Things that could happen to you. So kind of outside in, external forces? Would it have anything to do with a customer or with the federal government or with state governments, right? What kind of good news could happen that would make you go, whoa, we're gonna really be okay? And then the second question is, what are some things that our organization might do that would help us have a surprisingly successful future? What are some things we could do that would help us have a really surprisingly successful future? Okay. So we've kind of gotten a few ideas out of our heads onto paper, thinking about these 3 future zones. Now I'm going to ask you to make a judgment call on something. I've built these numbers 1 through 9 around the edge of the fan. So zone 1 would be, holy cow, it doesn't get much worse. This is as challenging as we ever could have imagined it was going to be, right? So numbers 1, 2, and 3 are in that challenging zone, but 1 is the worst, 3 is the best of the bad, right? 4, 5, and 6 are in that expectable zone. I kind of expect us to be somewhere in this range, and then zone 7, 8, and 9. So here's my question for you. We can't see this. We don't know what you're doing right now. I want you to just touch the place on the screen that you think your workplace is headed right now. Which zone number, 1 through 9? It doesn't have to be perfect and it doesn't have to be right. It is your gut. You sit in such a crucible chair in your organization. You're balancing employees who say, we don't want to come back to work until we feel safe, or essential jobs that are saying, jeepers, you guys, it's hell. You got to take better care of us, right? You as HR are sitting in that seat. Meanwhile, you've got executives and managers saying, let's get back to work, right? You're feeling a lot of pressure in both directions, right? So you have a really good sense of which zone the future of the workplace is headed towards. Now, I want you to write that number on your piece of paper if you're taking notes. Just write that number on your piece of paper. And my follow-up question would be, what is something you personally could initiate that would help that number be 1 tick higher? So if you chose 4, what could you personally be responsible for, take action on, that could help you be a 5? If you chose 6, how could you be a 7, right? The point here is this: the future doesn't just happen to you. You also happen to the future. And this is one of the reasons Jason and I wanted to circle up with you guys, with all 600 of you today, right? Is to say, hey, we can co-create something kind of amazing together if we can slow our heads down, our brains down, and really think about how we're thinking about this. And if we can be thoughtful about these future zones and these plausible scenarios, how can we emerge on the other side of this? So Jason, with that, we've given them a lot to think about. Why don't we take a few questions before we roll into Jason and Rebecca's version of the world.
Awesome. I love the quote that I'm gonna hang on to there. Not that I've probably heard you say this before, but the future doesn't happen to you. You also happen to the future is like such a beautiful place to anchor yourself right now in terms of your thinking. Like what a great place to be. So all right, so I know there's got to be questions out there. So for the moment, let's go and let's see some questions. Okay, so Rebecca, you'll love this one. The very first question, Marissa says, how do you define futurist?
Oh, a futurist is maybe a good way to think about it is this, Marissa. So a historian studies the past, journalists report on what is happening right now, right? And futurists are trying to report on what is likely to happen. So a futurist is simply somebody who studies trends, has some tools just like this in their toolbox, and can make some educated guesses about what may happen. We do not predict, and we do not predict the future. That's 2 huge misconceptions. Is what we do is we think through plausible futures, plural, because there's not a single future. The future is a combination of how we take action on the future and the kind of stuff that comes at us that we have to ninja roll with.
Awesome. And I love, there's another question here, which I think is really interesting probably right now. Melanie, we're going to come back to your question about work from home and sort of what role that plays here, I think, in our when we get into our stuff. But what role does fear play in one's way of thinking about the future, Rebecca?
Oh, I love this question. Who asked this question, Jason?
Janice Jarrett.
Hey, Janice. Thank you for asking this question. There are two pieces of this. One is fear constrains our view. We know that when animals and people are afraid, they tend to get very myopic and tunnel vision. Fear is a terrible place to make decisions about the future. You know, it's one of the reasons, I mean, we know this from studying people who don't have food security or financial security. Everyone's like, how come they can't make better decisions for their future? You know, these people with privilege often ask this, policymakers. Well, the truth is your mental apparatus is literally impaired when you are trying to figure out if your power is going to get turned off at the end of the week and so forth. So we know that fear has a negative impact on the ability to make good decisions for the future. That's number one. Number two, a good futurist, in my opinion, should help eliminate fear, right? Because what we're trying to do with these tools, I think the boogeyman is what kind of comes to me. I think a lot of people think the future is kind of this dark room and what the hell might be lurking in there. And all we're trying to do as futurists is like click, click, like pull the light chain and show a little bit of daylight onto what could be. So the role of futuring is to help bring down the emotional temperature and have a discussion about what could be and what should be.
So this builds on, and this is another question I think you will love because it connects back to one of the things that I found really helpful in your teaching. Jeff asks, you know, sometimes we live in multiple zones simultaneously. What about asking the improvement question within multiple zones? For example, feeling visionary and also scared.
I'm not sure I understand what the improvement question is. Like how are you going to improve from like a 2 to a 3, from a 7 to an 8? I might need more clarity. Or Jason, maybe you are the question whisperer.
I don't know. The way that I read this was one of the things I learned at Futurist Camp and going through this that's helpful is that when you are, you know, when you answer all of those questions about the cone, is that one of the questions that I will, like if I'm planning for myself or if I'm thinking about future of work scenarios, is I say, okay, what things cut across all possible futures? You know, what things can I do that would have a positive impact regardless of trajectory? And I think that at least that's how I'm reading Jeff's question is, well, what about like, because we need to be thinking about both. Yes. Why can't we be holding both those at the same time?
Yes, you guys are so lucky to have Jason. That's exactly right. So in a what we would normally do is we would have people literally write stories in each of the zones, and we would have them write 4 stories: 1 challenging story, 1 expectable, and 2 visionary zones. Because why? Because we want to do better than before. That's why. You know, we want to kind of gently put a finger on the scale of better. And when you do those 4 scenarios, you look for, okay, and what are the things that we can control that will have a good outcome in any of those 4 scenarios? So Jason already sort of opened the kimono on this, right? What are the things, no matter if it's challenging, expectable, or visionary, that we can do to deepen trust with our employees? So even if more crap hits the fan, there are things you can be doing today. I've heard that many of you are so amazed and blown away that your CEOs are actually talking with people about what they're thinking and what they're seeing, and that you're like, I hope that continues. Well, that may be one of the best ways you can help engineer additional trust in the future, right? Is to say we have to keep these communication channels open and transparent. So that's what Jason is talking about, is you look for those kind of those crossover actions or strategies that you know are going to help you stay out of the ditch in a challenging situation, that are going to help you make the best of an expectable situation and could help you notch up in that surprising future. Thank you.
And Jeff, if I butchered your question, just hit us with a different one and we'll do it again. So I'm hoping I did you some justice there. that's my own probably confirmation bias at work, reading my own interest into Jeff's question. Let's see. Well, I think this is interesting. So and this gets into the trust piece here. What's a supportive and yet definitive way to share with senior leaders on sort of how to, I think, demonstrate, I think what she's saying here, or he is saying, how to demonstrate true trust and transparency. Anything you've seen that you've been really inspired by or that you think is powerful?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing, it's one thing to like hear the CEO sort of, you know, thump their chest and be like, I'm sending out a memo every week. Congratulations, wise guy, way to go. But what I love hearing is from employees who say, whoa, I wanted you to see that Tim sent this out, or I wanted you to see that, you know, this came across my desk. And I think what is trust creating, and first of all, it's not built overnight. You know, there's not going to be like a new video chat with the CEO that's going to suddenly do this, a cadence of this and a consistency of this. But the first thing I would say is vulnerability, right? So, you know, when I was hearing about, you know, CEOs who were sharing how they were in a cat fight with their spouse at home during work at home, like this shit is not easy to do. Like we are on top of each other. You know, and the idea is to be a human being first. You know, share how you are a human being. And this means you don't have to have the answers, right? But it means that people need to know where you stand. Do you stand on the side of we're going to protect everybody's safety, right? Like, where does your CEO stand on some of these fundamental issues that people can see their way into? Jason, what have you heard? Because your ear is way more to the ground on this stuff than mine is with HR employees.
Well, I mean, trust building is such a huge thing. I mean, that's why and you prompted me. We were talking about this and we were talking about trust, and you're like, you should like get that written. And so that's why I wrote the post this week, to nudge that way. But I think one of the things that I've heard is interesting is like you talk about the CEO message or that's been an interesting positive trend, I think, that pushes us towards a positive zone, is that there's been more communication. I've been hearing that over and over, like from HR people that are like, I've been surprised by how much our leaders are actually communicating right now. Now, I'm a little skeptical about, you know, as fatigue kicks in and we start to settle back into old habits. However, the places that I think that it's most transformative is what they're doing is they're going to the employees, asking like what they're worried about, what they're concerned about, what questions they are in advance. And then the leaders are literally just going through, taking those questions, the good ones, the easy ones, the hard ones, and just like, you know, it's like, when are we coming back? You know, when do we go back to the office? And being willing to sort of lean into like, we don't know, like we're working on it, but we don't know. What does that look like? We don't know yet. We're working on it, but we don't, you know, being willing to also, that's where that vulnerability comes in. So I think that's been what I've seen is probably had the biggest immediate impact, is really that conversation and that openness around like, let's just lay it out. And I think that's where this tool is, this way of thinking is also super helpful, I think, for leaders. I mean, if you're thinking as an HR person advising your leaders, you know, being able to lay out, and I think this maybe gives us a nice transition into, we should probably, you know, maybe we step into sharing the work we did, because I think when you can lay out like, hey, here's, you know, I did some work, here's what I, you know, or using, you know, working with your leaders to say, okay, let's lay out our assumptions and what we think is going to happen. And then let's lay out the different paths that might unfold and what those decision points will look like, so that while I can't tell an employee for sure definitively what's going to happen 6 months from now, I can at least help them understand how we're going to be making decisions about what's coming. And I think that's why I think this is so powerful.
Awesome. Well, let's do it. Let's transition into that. And I just want to share again, like Jason and I mean, literally this started on like a yellow pad with the cone, right? And then I typed it up and Jason and I worked on it on a shared document. Like this does not have to be like highly sophisticated with modeling. This can be a few conversations. So Jason and I started with, when you go to the blog, if you are interested in the entire process, right, for how to do this work, Steps 1 and 2 are to lay out what you know and what you don't know. Because when you've got those two sort of guidelines, you're able to say, okay, based on what we know and don't know, which by the way is changing every week, what are we assuming right now? So Jason and I laid out our assumptions, and here they are. We only have 4. 1, COVID-19 will eventually develop a treatment over the next 18 months was our time horizon. We'll eventually develop a treatment to all the scientists sharing all this data and doing all this research, but we don't believe we'll have a vaccine based on what scientists tell us how long it takes. And people saying we need more than one. So we will have a treatment, but we won't have a vaccine. Americans will settle into, I'm putting this in air quotes, acceptable levels of illness and death, right? You're already seeing this as governors and states are reopening, that there is an acceptable level of trade-off between death and the economy, or illness and the economy. Number 3, we believe over the next 18 months, most American workplaces are going to continue to triage remote work. It's going to be an outlier instead of operationalize it or institutionalize it. And we also believe that people who are in essential roles, and I think this is an important note to take. We need to stop talking about essential workers, because that puts the job and the person together, and those people are starting to feel stigmatized. We need to talk about essential roles into which other people could be trained. So it's an essential role, not necessarily an essential worker. That is just a kindness to people who are in those roles and are really feeling embattled. We believe that essential roles over the next 18 months are going to be reconsidered, because we're trying to eliminate burnout. We're trying to keep everybody safe. We're trying to hang on to some very valuable employees who, if they feel like they're being taken to the woodshed every week, they're going to up and leave as soon as they can see daylight on that. So we believe those are our 4 assumptions moving forward. And then here are some tripwires that we're like, and tripwires are things we want to watch for. Like if this tripwire gets crossed and the bomb explodes, these are the bombs that we anticipate could explode. Number 1, Jason calls it a grease fire. I love it. A grease fire in June, because all the restrictions are being lifted now. By the time that the COVID cycle goes through community transmission, will we have another huge spike? So will that be a grease fire? Number 2, under the tripwires, PPP is going to expire in 8 weeks' time. It's like this rolling 8-week window. The first amount of PPP will expire within the next 4 weeks. So what is going to happen then? More unemployment, more businesses closing, shuttering for good. Unknown. It's unknown yet what will happen after the PPP funding expires. And then the other thing we don't know, but we are listening closely for, is how do all of these closures affect supply chain? So what does this do? And you know, the hotspots are moving around the world, you know, so it's impacting supply chain around the world. So Jason, do you want me to go into predictions, or do you want to start taking the predictions?
No, you can. Why don't you do the kind of the 3 prediction zones, and then I'll talk about some things that I think maybe we should be doing.
Okay, all right, so let me start in the challenging zone. So we're calling the challenging zone, and by the way, it's always cool when your scenarios in that zone have a title. We're calling this brute force. And we expect that in the challenging zone, that employers who try to muscle people back into work, who say, come back or else, that is going to be the most challenging zone, especially for you watching this webinar today, right? That you are going to be in this precarious position where employees who have proven that they can be trusted are being told, come back to work, come back into an environment that they may not feel safe entering for themselves or for their family. So that challenging future zone is basically the zone where employers are saying, come back or else. Now the expectable zone is, just looking here, is the snapback zone. So in the expectable zone, this is going to be like putting a tablecloth over a pig and saying, we have a table. So in this expectable zone, we're calling it the snapback future, where work looks nothing like it did. Physical spacing, plexiglass everywhere, hand sanitizers, the uchi effect, like when somebody gets a little too close. So work looks absolutely different, but we're pretending it's absolutely the same. So that's what we think the expectable future is the tablecloth on a pig. And then the aspirational zone is a safety first zone. So this is the scenario that I think Twitter kind of exemplified recently, that said, you can work at home as long as you want, and we'll decide when we're going to open the business. And if you don't want to come back to work because you don't feel safe, that's fine. But that's our safety first scenario, where we foresee business leaders organizational leaders putting the safety of their employees ahead of anything else. So Jason, I'm going to stop there. You maybe want to jump in and say, all right, well, what the hell does this mean for these patient participants?
Well, so this is where, what I said earlier, what I really find valuable in thinking about this way is now, if I think about all three of those scenarios and I think about it through the seat of those that are responsible for trying to maintain or protect employee engagement as this is happening, which I think is most of the people that are here with us today, there were some things top of mind that popped out for me. So across all three of these, regardless of what happens, I mean, not to beat a dead horse, but trust building, the degree to which you can build, maintain, cultivate your skill around trust organizationally is going to be vital. And so it doesn't matter which end you're on, right? Because if you're on the brute force, you're starting from like, well, we had a little trust, we've completely demolished all of it. Now what do we do? On the aspirational end, we're trusting everybody to the max, and we have to really learn how to do that. And so I think that's one that I think is, let's lean into that. I think two is, even though in our assumptions we're making the assumption that remote work is going to be still viewed as sort of a triage, I do think that remote work is going to be a part of what we do going forward. It's just going to have to be. And so whether that's our remote, and I say remote working, it might not even be like, even if in the brute force scenario we push everybody back to the office, we still have a new level of awareness and new tools to work across, remote offices, for example, and those kinds of things. So learning how to work more effectively, instead of it being just a triage, like really leaning into how do we actually learn how to make this work? How do we optimize working apart from one another was a second thing. And I think the third thing for me is that we've traditionally had a blind spot around safety, because I don't think we've really had to, even if I think about it on a psychological safety perspective, harassment and the whole Me Too thing snuck up and surprised everybody, except for the people that happened. It didn't surprise women, but organizational leaders and people, like, there was all this surprise, and that was a safety issue. And like, even at that level, we weren't doing very well. We haven't even had to think about like the Maslow's bottom level safety of like, am I actually safe to go to work? And so I think safety, regardless of the scenarios, is going to be a primary engagement driver. We don't have that in our engagement data, but I would be shocked if over the next 12 to 18 months, we don't see safety emerge as a driver, like a fundamental driver of engagement. And that's a completely different, that's new territory. So we need to be out ahead of that, I think, and thinking about that, not just physical environment, but also, psychologically, what's it going to take to make me feel safe working, or safe just in my life? I know I wrestle with that all the time. Like, what's safe and what's not? I don't know that I even know. And so how do we make sense of that for employees? So those are three things for me. I'm curious what comes up for you.
Me, Rebecca, or you participants?
I would say, I think
both?
just broadly, for wherever you want to take it, Rebecca, it's your time. We have a few minutes left. Do with it what you want.
Yeah. Well, let's hear from the participants. Like, thinking about your own number, right, and where you would like to be, or where you think your organization can be. What occurs to you as like an issue that you have to start to get right now? I'm interested to see how you can light up the chat with your responses on that. As those are coming in, yeah.
Go to the Q&A and do that. I know the chat there is no chat on the attendee, and it's Q&A, so go to the Q&A. I learned this last month, so thank you, GoToWebinar. Why they took chat away, I don't know. So go to the Q&A.
Go to the questions, yeah. And the question is, what's one thing you feel you need to do if you want to be, the best you can possibly be across all of these zones? Interested to hear that. From my perspective, I would say regardless of what happens, the transparency and the communication, I think, has to impart two things, right? One is perspective, right? To give employees perspective on what's happening, right? So they want to, when something feels this close to you, when something is this close to you, my fist isn't actually 15 inches across, whatever your screen looks like. My fist is only the size of a fist. But when things are so close, they just feel so big. So how can we help give our people a sense of perspective? We've been through hard things before. We will get through this. When I did my letter to my staff, I said, we went through the recession and we had none of the tools we have today. We can get through this. We can get through this. And here is your role. And that's the second part, is people also at all levels of the organization want to know what they can do. And I hope that we can get out of fighter mode long enough so that we can tell other employees how they can support essential roles, or what they can do that would be meaningful, how we together can help each other and support each other. Part of a dojo, it's kind of a church-ish organization. We talked about dividing up our entire list, and everybody's responsible for 3 to 5 people just to check in and say, how are you? Are you okay? Yep. I don't think the worst is behind us yet. Jason, what are folks saying?
There's a lot of, trust, communication. There's a ton of that coming up. Safety, and I do want to comment on a couple of the people that we have spent a lot of time talking about remote work, and want to acknowledge the fact that we know that that's not the only kind of work that is out there. And I think when I'm talking about there was a question kind of when I said these 3 things or whatever, that what do I mean by that? What I'm meaning is those 3 things are things that, regardless of what happens, regardless of the future that you are looking at right now, doubling down on trust skills, doubling down on safety, doubling down on understanding how to enable remote work, I think really make that work. I think those are 3 things that, regardless of the trajectory, that actually helps you move up a number, no matter where you are on the as we go forward. And so that's why I suggested those things. And I think safety and trust and some of that, I think well-being is another thing that we're going to need to really be paying attention to for people: mental, emotional, physical well-being. But if we invest there, whether your staff is retail or restaurant staff, frontline, or airline pilots and attendants, or healthcare, I think it cuts across all of those things. So those are why I'm like, those are the levers I would really be leaning into, or I think we need to be really paying attention to. So that's what I meant there.
Such great advice.
But you're seeing, yeah, that's kind of everything I'm seeing here. So before we're running like right up at the top of the hour. Rebecca, tell people how to find you. I know we're going to send some information out to people. I think you'll follow up with them as well. But if they want to go find more Rebecca Ryan right now, what should they do?
2 places. One is RebeccaRyan.com. It is not updated for all of COVID yet, so apologies for that. We did just announce to our current 2020 class of campers that camp will be online starting in July. So if anybody's interested in futurist camps, go to RebeccaRyan.com. That will be updated by the end of the night tonight. And on Medium, thank you, Jason. And on Medium, you can, if you just look for Rebecca Ryan Futurist on Medium, I've been blogging my face off. You can see, like, it is just like me cracking my head open and dumping it all out. Maybe more than I should sometimes, frankly.
Well, and your email list, which I think is often the stuff that, similar to stuff you're posting on the blogs, has been one of the really most helpful things for me through all of this, helping to make sense and ground and give me ways to think about things. So thank you for that. And I'd recommend that to everyone here. One last thing, actually 2 last things. One is I put up a slide to tell you about a future webinar webcast that's coming up. You can go to achieveengagement.org to find more information there. And the other thing I would say is that if you like our brand of craziness, our flavor of stuff here, mark June 10th and 11th on your calendar. Just block those babies out, because we have a big announcement coming next week, and I promise you're going to want to have some time free on those days. So with that, Rebecca, as always, thank you. I love you. I love your content. Thank you for being with us and sharing that. So virtual hugs. we'll put off our real hugs for 24 months or whatever that looks like. So everyone, virtual hugs to you as well. Reach out if we can do anything for you. Hit us up. Let us know what you want to hear about, what you're wrestling with, and we will do our best to bring you some insights and some content to help. With that, be safe and take care of yourselves.